Okay, let's start. So the menu for today is we're going to give a few more comments to see if I confuse you more or I clarify what you know about that exercise, problem 1. Then we have some comments about multiphase flow. We have seen how the curve, the available and required curve looks like for single phase gas and also for liquid. For multiphase, there are a few things you have to take into account. Okay, we hope not to stretch it too much, but I think you should at least be aware of what happens when we have multiphase flow. That is really the most common case. You never really have dry gas, you never really have single phase oil, but you see always have some liquid in the gas, or you always have some gas with the oil. Okay? And the last part, I think, to avoid having the class too heavy, we say you work in class with those two problems. That problem 2 is already published. Maybe I will give some comments, and then if you need, I can help you around. Okay? So that's the plan. Let's see if we manage to keep it. Okay? So, a few things. We are really what we are solving in our problem. We have a reservoir. Okay. Then we have a collection of wells draining from that reservoir till we have a plem, and then we have a long transportation pipe all the way to the separator, okay, that we call this slug catcher. Okay. The choke, we have it here someplace, and that's the P at the template, if you remember. That's that template of 4 wells, and then from there we have the flow line, and then we have this pipeline. And here we have like the wellhead conditions, and here we have reservoir conditions. Okay, so what we are solving, what we are looking pretty much in detail, is we want to get what happens here. Okay, and there are 2 main things. We want to know pressure, first delta P, we want to know delta T, we want to know pressure versus X, okay, versus length, and temperature versus X. That's really our main objective, okay? But to reach here, we have to go back a bit, okay? So, but it doesn't mean we're going to solve the pressure drop, okay, in the whole system. We are not going to do that. We have those conditions, okay, and that we need to saturate. We know that we have to saturate that fluid with water, okay, and for that we have this first unit here. So I have made some changes, but it's basically what we have done yesterday. Okay, so here in this part to the left, I'm representing is the saturation of reservoir gas with water. Okay, simply because we don't have how much water, we don't have in our composition how much water we have. Okay, if you go to the problem statement, you will see that simply we have purely hydrocarbons. Okay, we don't have the water, and we know there will be water. That's the whole reason why we are going to have hydrates. Okay, if we had no water, we can assure that there will be no water, no need to inject anything, no need to inhibit anything. Okay, then we have on this second part we have our pipeline. That's the main thing we are concerned about. Okay, that's to find out this delta P in pipeline and also the delta T in pipeline. Okay, but also we had to add a separator here, or we had to separate the phases. Why was that? because the field, we measure the production in terms of this gas, which is, relatively dry gas. This is the one that is going to be 20 million, okay, standard cubic meter per day. And we know when we recombine with the condensate, here it will be more than that, okay. Here you will have, the mass flow will be the gas plus the liquid, okay. And we are sure this one is 20. That's what they are measuring, but we are not sure how much is that. Okay, and due to the fact that HYSYS makes always co-current, okay, HYSYS usually doesn't work counter-current, this stream will be defined by this stream. Okay, this stream will be defined by this stream. This will be defined by this, and so forth, all the way until we reach the first stream. Okay, so it means that I have to fix here the mass flow or the molar flow. Okay, and that's why I added this new adjust, okay, to say I want this one to be 20, so change this mass flow that I introduced. I know it's around 200, but do a fine tune until I find exactly here 20. Okay, that doesn't mean that we are simulating a well with the field rate, which will be wrong, right? We are just simply saying we have those conditions of pressure and temperature. We magically take it up here to some magical conditions of wellhead. Okay, we do the expansion in the choke, and then we simply use that as the inlet to the pipeline. Okay, but we are not solving pressure drop or anything inside the well, inside the flow line. We are assuming that's a condition we have. Okay, so we have that pressure and temperature, we saturate, and then we take it to those conditions of pressure and temperature that I don't know. But I know the pressure here has to be such that it should, after a pressure drop on the choke of 160 that we have, it should be enough to flow against 30 bar, to give you here 30 bar. Okay, so that's why we have that other adjust, that it will change that pressure that we don't know, such that after having a delta P of 162 bar, it should give you here exactly 30. Okay, and you could do it manually, but I told you let's use that solver. But you see here something a bit tricky. This component, we have always said components work, you give the input and it gives you the output. This component is a bit different. Okay, we are giving that pressure and temperature, and we are giving that pressure and temperature. So the component is calculating the difference. And that can only be done because that's a cooler. Okay, in the cooler, I can provide delta P and delta T, and it will calculate. No, basically you provide P in, and that only happens for some components. Okay, I can provide P in, P out, T out, and it will compute which simply is a very straightforward calculation. Delta P, delta T, and the heat that I have to remove from the stream. Okay, but not all components work like that. Okay, it actually, for example, the pipe, you cannot give these two pressures and temperatures and it will calculate, well, this is the pipe size you need. Okay, it doesn't work like that. So that only works for some components. Yeah, okay, so basically, what else was I going to say? Yeah, so one thing you have also to be careful with HYSYS, sometimes when it finds that problem, okay, like for example here, I think last time the problem we had, we were defining the mass flow here, okay, and the mass flow here. So it says that's an inconsistency. That mass flow should be given by co-current, this mass flow plus this water, then passing through the heater, and then that's how I find the mass flow. Then it kind of enters in breakdown. Says I cannot work. Okay, cannot compute. In that case, you have here two buttons in the Home tab that they are good to if you want to force sizes to calculate or you want to stop. By default, it's like Excel. It will try to calculate everything that is on the sheet. So if you want to make a change, you stop it. Then you make the changes you want. You make sure you are consistent. And then you again click active, simply that it will calculate. Okay? So be aware of that. Especially when you have the adjust, sometimes when you first put them to start, like sometimes it forgets that it has to calculate. So it simply doesn't do anything. So it's good that you deactivate and activate just to give it a push. Okay? So software is not supposed to behave like humans, but sometimes they do. So we have to deal with that. Okay, so if you want to make a big change, HYSYS will complain, you stop it, do it, and then click active. Or if you simply see it doesn't do anything, it's like sleeping, doesn't notice the change, you click stop and active, and then it should, notice the change. Yeah. So on the pipe, I'm using a simplified profile, okay? But on the pipe, if you go to the performance, you see, here in my case, I have simply one segment. Okay, I have simply one segment, 158, and incline going up. But if you go to performance, you will have all the results. So that's the elevation profile. How is the elevation with the distance? You can find also the temperature. Okay, how is the temperature along the distance? Also the pressure. And I recommend don't use these plots. The font size is not nice. The background is not nice. The units maybe are not the best. So extract the data. If you go here to table, you see exactly the same information, but on table. So you can simply select, maybe using the keyboard. Okay, and you paste it on Excel. Okay, and I would recommend just do the plot in Excel. Maybe you can make this one look nicer, but if you have some issues, better to do the plotting in Excel. Now here you have the hold up. That's a bit what we are going to discuss today. Okay, for multiphase flow, here we have actually a flow of gas and liquid in the pipe, and then we want to account how much liquid is at any given time in the pipe. Okay, for many reasons, to see if there is accumulation, to see in which parts that we have more liquid. That affects also the pressure drop. So that's one of the things you will have to plot, that I have asked you to plot in the exercise. Okay, and this we're going to talk a bit later, but basically it's telling you segregated, you have like a stratified flow. Okay, the flow of gas is going to the top and flow of liquid is going at the bottom. You have a lot of other information here. Okay, the velocity of the vapor, velocity of the liquid. So you see, it's not a small number. If, see, liquid hold up 12%, okay, that's a fraction. That means from the pipe, 12% is occupied by liquid, which initially there was none. Okay, initially at the inlet of the pipe, we had, simply gas, and then it's starting to drop out, condensate and water, all the way until we find that we have 12% of the pipe occupied by liquid. Okay. Yeah, another comment is that pressure is giving us higher than reservoir pressure, okay, which doesn't make really sense. Okay, but the thing is that if you remember here, to make that calculation, to calculate the choke in Excel, we are coming from here to here with this equation line P1, okay, that this assumes dry gas This assumes horizontal pipe. Okay, and then we were moving from here to here again with line P1. And then we moved from here to here with the IPR and the tubing equation. And that's how we found the choke, okay, the delta P of the choke. Do you remember what value did we get here for the pressure at the plem from the exercise? I think it was something like 60 or 70, I think. Yeah. But if you see how much we're getting here, okay, we're getting 130. So it's twice, basically, it's almost twice the pressure drop. Well, 30 to 60, 30, and then 120, that's 90. So it's 3 times. So that means that approximation we have used is simply too optimistic. We have more pressure drop than what we thought, okay, especially in this line P1. So what will be the main conclusion, or what should we do to correct our calculations? To redo the equilibrium, okay, with a better model. Okay, instead of using dry gas, we should use maybe dry gas all the way to here is fine, but this one we should use a better model, something like HYSYS, something that takes into account the mixture, the flow of the mixture. But what is the main consequence of that? That the pressure drop is higher. Shorter plateau, and also the choke will be, the delta P across the choke will be smaller. Okay. So if a better model is used, okay, it will probably yield the two main is shorter plateau, okay, and the delta P of the choke will be smaller. Okay, simply I don't have to choke too much to bridge the difference. Okay, the energy downstream is much higher than one I had. Okay, and if that's the case, then the cooling, we are now assuming 160. It might be that we need now not 160, but maybe 100. Okay, so the cooling will be less. The cooling that we are experiencing from here to here will be less. So the temperature doesn't drop that dramatically. Now we see that the temperature goes from 70 to 50. Okay, 20 C's drop. What you will probably have if you are consistent maybe is much less than that. Instead of 20, maybe 10, maybe 5. Okay. Well, we are neglecting that complexity, otherwise we will have to make our calculations again. Okay, so we are neglecting that, and we are just living with the fact that we know this is wrong. Okay, we know it shouldn't give you a pressure higher than reservoir pressure. We know the delta P across the choke that we have to recalculate that. But just for simplicity, let's leave it like that. Okay. Now, a few things here. So we have mentioned the separator, we have mentioned the pipe, the choke, we have mentioned this cooler is simply to take from reservoir conditions to wellhead, magically, okay, somehow. The saturation unit to add water to the stream, and the adjust. In the adjust, remember, you have to be careful. You have to be careful with the tolerance you want. We don't want it to be perfect all the way to 1 to the minus 5 bar. Okay? Engineering, we say, if it's 30, 30.1, we are happy. Okay? Or even 31, we might be happy. Also, the step size, be careful. That's from another solution, from one iteration to the other. That's the step that is going to use. And if it's too large, let's say it's changing in 10 bars, you probably will never manage to reach within your tolerance. You will never manage to converge. Okay, so use a step size which is according. Okay. Another thing you have to be careful, if you have more than 2 adjusts, okay, remember to say simultaneous solution. That means it has to solve both adjust at the same time. And in this case, it's important. Why? This adjust is changing rate. So rate is changing pressure drop across the pipe. And this adjust is changing pressure. And that pressure is also changing pressure drop across the pipe. So that's why both of them have to be solved simultaneously. It's not that you can change this one and you find convergence, okay, and then you find 20, but you also have to change this one such that it gives you 30. Okay, so they have to be solved at the same time. So again, if you do it and you see that HYSYS doesn't respond, doesn't notice, just remember the magical stop it and then start again. And remember to save. Okay? So let me just copy that such that you remember the simultaneous solution. Okay, be aware that you have to tick. If you have two and more than two adjust, you have to tick. Okay, and the last thing is you have here I have added methanol. Okay, because we know we have to inject methanol, and methanol, or in this case monoethylene glycol. Okay, and we know that's a liquid, and we have such a small amounts of liquid in the pipe that even if I add methanol, that might change a bit the pressure drop across the pipe. That's simply adding more liquid, and that will make a change. So that's optional. No, I think it's not optional. No, I don't think so. But what we are doing here is we are injecting that MEG, okay, to the wellhead, and then we're having the expansion on the choke, and that MEG will go through the pipe. And that will be simply added liquid into the pipe. That's a mixer. To avoid having these two with the same pressure, which you can do, okay, you can use another tool called it's called set, okay, and in set basically you can say put the pressure of these streams the same to the pressure of that stream. Okay, so you can use that, but what I have done here, I said the MEG is entering at the same temperature. It will eventually reach the same temperature of 70, but the pressure is very, very high, which is not far away from the true. Okay, the pressure, if you remember last class, okay, to get inside on the methanol, to get inside this line, which might be at 200 bar, 100 and something bar, that pressure has to be much, much higher. Okay, and typically those pressures can be all the way through 300 to 700 bar. Okay, so we are saying we don't care what is the pressure, but we know it's a very high pressure. But when you join it with that and you continue, you reach that equilibrium pressure. It's not going to be kept at 700 bar. Okay, so that pressure really doesn't matter. Simply I put it very high, and then in the mixer I have specified I want to mix MEG and the wellhead without the MEG. Outlet this wellhead down, and I have said set outlet to the lowest inlet. Okay, in that case it will be the wellhead stream. Okay. And that's it. That's how, you know, roughly, you might be slight variation, you find a more clever way to make it, but that's basically how your HYSYS should look like. Okay, just be patient, remember to save, stop and then start, close and open. So I hope you manage successfully. Okay, there is one more thing. So for those of you who want to use it, if you click on, I think I mentioned this already before, but you have something called attachments, analysis. If you click on a material stream, and you can create an envelope that I think I asked you to plot that, okay, and now it's very heavy, so it takes some time. Okay. And if you go to performance, you have the plot, and you see how the envelope looks like. Everything is on the dew point because it's we are far away. It's a gas. Okay. But here you can find also the hydrate line. Okay, how it looks like, and maybe those of you who don't want to use the one I provided, you can use that line. Okay. Just be aware, I'm not sure how different they might be. Okay, I made that line using another program. Okay. And on the pipe, this version of HYSYS has a tab called flow assurance. Okay, and in flow assurance you have one section you can evaluate corrosion, can evaluate erosion due to the velocity, you can evaluate slug, wax, but you have hydrates. Okay. So in this case you have the temperature, how it goes along the pipe, and you have the hydrate formation temperature, also how it's changing along the pipe, mainly to pressure. Okay? Because along the pipe the pressure is also going down. And if you remember, the hydrate line was something like that. That means that it has the same behavior. So when these two they cross, that's where you have hydrate problems. Okay. So if I change the amounts of methanol, okay, let's say how much water we have. We have okay, we have 12,000 kilograms per hour, and in the MEG I now, let's say, reduce the amount. Okay, I have set 8,000, but let's now say to 4,000 kilogram per hour. 8,000 was like 70%, weight percent of the total stream, and now it's like 50%. Now you go back. We'll first let it converge. It also helps sometimes when it's subconverging that you give a seed which doesn't give you negative pressure. Because if you use a very low pressure at the inlet, it will have problems calculating the pressure if it becomes negative. And it takes a long time to start to increase it. So you can say, well, I know it was around 120 bar, so you can specify that pressure at the inlet of the pipe. Okay, now we reach, instead of 20 million, 23, and instead of 30 bar, 30.01, which I think it's fine. Okay, and now we go back again to this flow assurance tab, and you see now you have a problem. Okay, because now it assumes that the stream has a different amount of MEG, and this MEG causes the hydrate to happen at a higher temperature. Okay, I'm using less, and now that's where I have the crossing off. Here, from this point in the pipe, I will have hydrate problems. Okay.
This is for a single pressure, right?
No.
This is for a single pressure.
No, because pressure is changing. If it was always the same pressure, this line should be horizontal. Okay. But due to the fact that pressure is changing, you have a pressure which is also declining with distance. The hydrate line is also declining. Okay. I don't like this plot too much, okay? It's a bit confusing. I prefer the PT, and you see the PT along the pipe and the hydrate line, okay? So you have to do some thinking how to interpret this plot. But basically, when it's crossing, coming into below the hydrate formation temperature, you have hydrate problems here. Okay, and that line is recalculated with the amounts of MEG you have on the pipe. So I'm not guaranteeing it will give you the same result, okay? I use another software. But you can also use that if you want, if you prefer. And some of you were, a bit shocked that what is the seabed temperature that we have here in Snow White? Was like 6, right? So we see something very strange that is going below. Okay, it's going to -10, -12 in our case. Okay, and that's basically below this point you have cooling, is cooling the pipe all the way until you reach 6. And after that, actually the environment is heating the pipe. Okay, and that has to do with the fact that due to the expansion effect, when you have a reduction in pressure for a gas, then you have also a reduction in temperature. Okay, this Joule-Thomson effect. So don't be scared about that. Okay, but you're going to work with that hopefully in the last hour. Okay, so just maybe if you have some questions, just we can discuss it at that time. But start simple, okay? Don't try to build the whole model. Start simple, maybe make the pipe, then make the saturation, then make the choke, then make the MEG, slowly, okay? Because otherwise, maybe you try to make the whole thing, it becomes a bit confusing. Any question? No? Later? Okay. So now let's talk very briefly about we have about multiphase flow. So let's take that example of the pipe, of the Snow White pipe. It's a long pipe. Then we have here our separator, 30 bar, and here we have a rate of gas that is circulating through it. Okay? And I want to plot, let's try to make a plot. Let's calculate the pressure in, okay, the pressure at the plem. Versus QG. Remember, QG is like a mass flow. It's not volume, it's like a mass flow. And here I have a Q of oil and a Q of water. And actually, the condensate gas ratio is Q of oil divided by Q of gas, and then the water gas ratio is Q of water divided by Q of gas. Okay, so that stands for condensate gas ratio, and that's water gas ratio. And that's not something you can neglect, okay? The condensate in a gas field can really boost up your economy. You're selling that, almost you can put it straight in the tank, okay, of the car. So it's usually has very high API, 50, 60, and it's very valuable product. Okay, so that's why we have. So we are saying here, CGR and WGR are constant. Okay, and I want to ask you, how does it look like how does the curve look like? And now we are saying back to basics, maybe the second week of class we have. How does it look like? If I have a very high rate, I will need a very high pressure. Okay? Then I have a lower rate, I need a lower pressure. Yeah? But now, because of the fact that we have here liquid in the pipe, okay, it's not any longer flow of single phase. We have something very, very interesting. Actually, the curve reaches a minimum point and then it starts to go up. Okay. And that's a bit strange. But we say that to the right we have friction dominated regime, and to this part we have a gravity dominated regime. You remember that the pressure drop of the fluid has mainly two components, okay? It has also acceleration, but mainly is friction and mainly the gravity or the hydrostatic. So what happens into this part of the curve is what we already expected, okay? When you increase the rate, you have a higher velocity. When you have a higher velocity, the friction losses are higher, and therefore I need more and more pressure. But here is something not very intuitive, okay? So that hydrostatic component, okay, we know it looks something like that, a density times gravity times delta Z, right? But that density that we are using in a mixture is the density of the mixture. Okay, it's not the density of the gas, it's not the density of the liquid, it's something in between. Okay. And actually, so if you see, okay, let's take this point 1 here, and let's see how it looks like. Okay, the velocity is relatively slow. Okay, the Q gas is relatively slow. Therefore, the liquid, well, actually we have to do it horizontally, right? Because we are assuming it's a horizontal pipe. Okay. So in that case, it's going relatively slow, and the gas is almost like, because of its density, it's almost like bypassing, going faster than the liquid. Okay, here you have a velocity of the gas and you have a velocity of the liquid. But when you start increasing, so if you see the density of the mixture, I can approximate as the volume fraction of liquid times the density of liquid plus the volume fraction of gas times the density of the gas. And the volume fraction, that's the volume fraction, I can approximate as the area, if I see at the cross section, okay, and I have some area of liquid, some area of gas, the alpha of gas will be area of gas divided by the cross section area of the pipe, okay, and alpha of liquid will be the area of liquid divided by the cross section of the pipe. That's how I approximate the density of that mixture. Okay, so for that case 1, the velocities are going very slow, liquid is going very slow, and the gas is like bypassing. Now when I start increasing the velocity for situation number 2, okay, actually what happens, the gas starts to drag. The gas has enough inertia such that it starts to drag the liquid. and the liquid starts to go faster. Okay, and in that case, and the gas by consequence starts to be going slower. Okay, while the liquid is going slightly faster. Okay, and because of that, the density of the mixture, if you see, it's only the phases are distributed in a different way. There is more gas in the cross section. Therefore, the density of the mixture goes down. It drops. Okay, and because of that drop, that's what you say the delta P also drops. And that phenomena continues over and over and over until we reach a minimum point. And then when the gas is going very, very fast, the friction component starts to be more important, starts to take over. Okay? So just maybe you have a different way to justify it, but basically goes up, down, and then up. Okay? Just remember that shape for real systems, gas with liquid, liquid with gas. We have a shape that is like that. And now let's take a break. Okay, we come back 11:15. So we know it has that shape, and actually for the most important effect, it's when you have basically a big change in elevation. That means when you have a well. Okay, that's where this effect is very, very important. So one thing you have to be familiar with if you're going to use a simulator, maybe you can use Excel for some simple cases, dry gas with oil, but in the most general case, you will need to use a simulator. Okay, so the simulator, they use something called flow tables. We're going to go now a bit later into how do you calculate each point, and you will see something that it takes some effort to calculate each point in this curve. But the way they do it, so you have a section of pipe, let's say, okay, let's say for example P downstream equal to 30 bar. Okay. Then you specify the CGR, condensate gas ratio, and the water gas ratio, and you compute for each. Then you have a table that gives you QG, Q of the gas, and that gives you P in, okay, P to the pipe, and you compute for different values okay, and basically these points are the points on the curve. Okay, that let's say we have 3 will be 1, 2, and 3. This will be for QG1, or the opposite, QG1, QG2, and QG3. Okay, so it's basically storing. You have a table that stores those points. Okay, and of course with anything we are approximating a very nonlinear function with a series of points. So it's very important where do you put the point. Okay, that's something we don't pay much attention typically. But if you have a valley, okay, here what I'm saying is that, well, they are close enough such that anything that happens in between can be reproduced by a straight line. Okay, if I want to have the P at the inlet required for that rate, which is in between, I simply make an interpolation in between. But it might be that actually the minimum point is there, okay, and I'm missing it. It will be a very bad approximation of what happens in the segment. Okay, but that's something we live with. Now, for the most general case, the P downstream is not known. Okay, and that is true, for example, when we talk about wells. In that case, will be PWH is not known unless you have very close a separator or you have a platform well where you can know the wellhead pressure. If you have a flow line which is not the end flow line, okay, for the last segment that goes to the separator, you can say the pressure is constant, but for any intermediate flow line, that pressure won't be constant. So you have, in that case, to create a series of tables for different P downstream. P downstream 1, P downstream 2, P downstream 3, okay, and then for each one of them you have CG, condensate gas ratio, water gas ratio. Okay, let's call it 1 also. And then you make a table for QG and P in. Okay, therefore, with what means is that, for example, this collection of 3 points will be for P down 30. Then, for example, for 40, where should it go? Should it be higher than this one or lower? Okay, usually if I increase it down, let's say the separator pressure I use now 60, and I have that rate, will I need a higher pressure or a lower pressure? Higher, okay. We are not so sure, okay. But yes, it goes up. Just be careful, there are two effects, okay? When I increase the pressure, that's true. The pressure, so if let's say P down it's here 60, and if I say P down is 15, then will be something like that. Okay, but I just want to make the comment that remember that the pressure drop due to friction has something to do with the local rate. When you go very down in pressure, then it will expand. In case if it's purely gas, you have a very high local rate. Then the velocities start to be very high, and it might be that you need even more pressure drop, or there will be even more pressure drop on the line. Okay, so you cannot always trust the trend will be, oh, higher pressure will be simply higher. Okay, because sometimes simply going for higher pressure makes the local rate to be smaller and makes the velocity to be smaller, therefore makes the losses to be smaller. Okay, so sometimes you have some crossing in these curves. Okay, so be careful on that. But basically we take those and we make some calculations and we store that on a table. Okay, and we have to make changes on the pressure, and these changes are made P down 1 to P down 3 is what I think that pressure might be. In a junction, for example, if I'm looking at, let's make another system here. I have 3 wells, for example. Okay, that pipe which is here, I don't need to make changes on the downstream pressure. That one will be always 30. I have some magic gnome keeping that pressure to be always at 30. Okay, but now this pressure, this P downstream, that has to change. That probably will change, and I have to find between what number and what number that will change. Okay, so if I may well say, that will be from, for example, 150 all the way maybe to 50. Okay, and then discretize, let's say in steps of 50, then I say one calculation for 150, one calculation for 100, and one calculation for 50. I'm not sure which one will it be, but I want to be sure to cover the whole range. So if you want to find, for example, for a P downstream, which is between P down 2 and P down 3, okay, I simply interpolate. Okay, make a bilinear interpolation on the plot. Therefore, remember, with interpolation, it matters how many points we take. If we're trying to take a very large area simply with 2 points, it will be a bad approximation. Okay? So we try to take an accurate number of points. Okay, another thing is that, let's take the case of the well, for example. We're going to see now, just very briefly, how these tables are generated. But the thing you have to know, most of the expressions are stored, most of the curves are stored as points, and we simply interpolate between these points. How do we calculate those points? That's another thing. Okay, but simulators very seldom make calculations live. They use this collection of tables stored someplace. So, for example, let's say you have your well, and you have here some pressure. Okay, let's assume for now that will be constant. And you want to make equilibrium. Okay, and I say that will be PWF versus Q. In this case, let's say it's gas. So the IPR, we know, it's a curve that goes like that. But typically I do exactly the same. I use a collection of points to represent the IPR. And I assume a straight line in between those points is good enough. Then for the tubing, okay, the TPR, I use also a collection of points. And I assume also a linear interpolation between them is good enough. And then finding the intersection is considerably simpler. It's just the intersection of two straight lines. You just have to find the range where the maximum and minimum overlap. Okay, and then I find the intersection is straightforward, the intersection of two straight lines. So that's why we prefer, or that's why in commercial software we're not using a solver or trying to solve a nonlinear function. We simply generate tables and then we make linear interpolation in those tables. Okay, that's part of the convenience. So when you look at, you have tubing tables, you have flow line tables, you have IPR tables, everything is trying to be compound in a table. Okay. The thing is that you have to, so the tables have to be generated for all variations, possible expected variations, okay? And that means, for example, in the case of IPR, we know that, for example, the GOR will be changing, okay? We know that the water cut will be changing. We know that the reservoir pressure will be changing. So that's something we have to, if for example now we are at a different reservoir pressure, okay, we have to, that will be reservoir pressure 1, then you have reservoir pressure 2, And then for anything in between, I simply interpolate. Okay. Now for TPR, exactly the same thing. I might have changes in the wellhead pressure if I don't have a separator right there, but I have simply a flow line. I might have changes again in GOR, either in water cut, okay, or I have changes in condensate gas ratio and water gas ratio. Okay, so for that I need to have a table for all of them. So let's say, for example, let's take an example, okay, for tubing TPR with variation in wellhead pressure in GOR water cut. Okay, now I know they are going to change within a range. GOR, due to the depletion, the reservoir you have more gas coming into the well. Water cut, maybe you have coning, and that will make it change during the life of the field. And wellhead pressure, simply because the rate through the flow line is changing, and that's changing the required pressure you need at the wellhead. Okay, and let's say you have some ranges. You have a minimum and a maximum, a minimum and a maximum, and a minimum and a maximum. Okay, how many points or how many runs do I need to generate each point? Well, if I say I divide this number of wellhead pressures, let's say I might say 2, might say 3, might say 10, times the number of points I need in GOR. If the GOR is changing, for example, from 100 to 1,000, let's say you do it every 100, so you have a certain number of points. Water cut. If the water cut is changing again from 0 to 100, maybe you do it every 10%. So what do I need? What else do I need? The rate, right? The rate is also changing. That's when we find intersection, the rate of oil or rate of gas, or rate of gas. 8 times the rate. The N, sorry. And that can grow very fast, okay? So using tables is very convenient. The intersection is fast. You don't have to run the simulator live. But here in this case, let's assume you use 10 points, okay, for each one of them. 10 times 10 times 10. Those are the total number of iterations you have to make to compute. Remember, at the end what we want is PWF. So we have to take all of those cases, the combination of all of those cases, and compute PWF. Okay? Which is a big effort. But that's how commercial simulators work. More or less clear? Okay, PipeSim, Gap, Prosper, almost any simulator works that way. You specify the dimensions of the pipe, the properties of the fluid, but then it pre-computes all of these cases, 10,000, 100,000, 10 million, 1 million. It computes, pre-computes, and saves the information on a table. Okay. Now, let's go, before you start working on the exercise, just very short how pressure and let's focus on pressure. Okay, pressure calculations are made in multiphase flow. Okay. And basically the main thing is that the density of oil, the density of gas are changing with pressure and temperature along the conduit, okay, along the conduit. And also what is changing is QO, Q gas, and Q water. Remember, these are the local rates from where we obtain the velocities of oil and velocities of gas, velocities of water that are needed for calculation pressure drop. Therefore, the main conclusion is that we perform calculations discretizing the pipe. That's the main conclusion. The variation is simply too large of density, of rates, that we have to discretize the pipe. Okay? And the general procedure is, if we look at the tubing, for example, okay, so we depart from a point of known pressure. Okay, and known is relative. It can be that the wellhead pressure is fixed, or it can be that I know the range of variation, okay, from 100 to 50. So I set to 100 first. Okay, let's say we're going from bottom hole. Okay, that will be PWF, and that will be PWH. In our case, for example, PWF. Of known pressure and known temperature. Now the next step is to try to calculate fluid properties at that pressure and temperature. We calculate some of the properties we need are density. Remember, we need for the density of the mixture, density of oil, local, okay, not standard. Density of gas, density of water, viscosity of oil, viscosity of gas, viscosity of water. We need interfacial tension between oil and gas, tension between oil and water. What else do we need? Maybe we need, if we want to calculate temperature, we will need the enthalpy. Okay. After I have found that, I have to calculate how much QO, Q water, and Q gas. Okay, I have to calculate the local rates. How much do I have of each? And here I think there are many different ways to do that. Okay, I can use black oil tables. Okay, that I have a factor BO, BG, RS, and small rs. I have a series of factors that they convert, right, between standard conditions and local conditions. Or I could use some EOS model, okay, that basically has to give me, I have some composition, some flowing composition. With this composition and pressure and temperature, I calculate the molar fraction or the mass fraction. What letter do we use? The mass flow of gas divided by mass flow of oil plus mass flow of gas. Okay. And with that, we calculate how much we have the total mass flow, and we can calculate how much gas and oil we have. Okay, we can calculate with XV times MT, that gives you mass flow of gas, of oil is 1 minus XV times mass flow of the total mass flow. And finally, I can find the Q of the gas will be the mass flow of gas divided by the density of gas. Q of oil will be mass flow of oil divided by density of oil. Okay. So a big step: pressure and temperature, calculate properties, define how much oil, gas, and water I have from the stream. Okay, which they might be different. Remember that gas is vaporizing from the oil, or it might be also that the oil is coming back to solution into the gas. Okay, so you have condensation and vaporization. After we solve that, the fourth step is we compute the delta P at that particular location. Okay, so let's say if we are departing here, we compute dP dx here. Okay, and for that we can use different models. We need to go to a multiphase flow expert. For that you have to take this course of Needle if you're interested, 4250. Okay, but basically here I can use correlations. I can use also some sort of a mechanistic model, and that's what HYSYS actually is using. HYSYS is using some correlations made in the 70s that two researchers, Bex and Brill, if you see the name, you will see it in the pipe element, or there is one called Hagedorn and Brown, that they went, did measurements in a pipe, and then finally they found a correlation. Okay, that the correlations typically use velocity of gas, velocity of liquid. They use the density oil, density gas, density of water. They use the viscosity. They use all of those properties we listed before. Interfacial tension. Okay, all of that is used as an input for that. Or we can have also some software, commercial software. Okay, to make that simply we provide all of that and it gives back the solution. So one example is, let's see if I can open it here. I'm going to get into trouble probably. Oh, I don't have it here. Yeah, it's maybe I show it next class. Okay, I don't have it installed on my computer. But on Olga, you have something called point model that you can come with all of this input, and it will calculate for you the delta P dx. Okay, and basically there are different models depending on the flow pattern. Okay, we can have, if we have gas and liquid, if we have a little bit of gas and mainly liquid, you will have, for example, one flow pattern called bubble flow. Okay, and in that case, both the oil and the gas are moving at the same speed. So you can simply say the density of the mixture is, well, assuming that both travel at the same velocity and assuming an average the density. And the viscosity, the fluid that is wetting the walls, is basically the liquid, the oil. So I use there are some other patterns that are a bit more strange. Okay, for example, we have that they are slug flow. Okay, where we have batches of gas going through the liquid. We have also some other patterns that are, for example, liquid on the walls, and then you have a core center of gas when the velocity of the gas starts being very high. So all of them have different ways to calculate the pressure drop, or to calculate the, depending on the flow pattern. Okay, so we have, from a point with known pressure and temperature, calculate properties, how much oil, gas, and water we have, calculate local rates, calculate velocities, calculate dp dx. What is the next step? We are just here, okay? We want to find out the pressure here, or we are just here, and we want to find out the pressure here. So what is the next step? Integration, right? We have to move to the next point in the tubing. So for that we have to discretize the tubing. Okay, and then I call this one, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's say we departed from PWH. And I have to move to 2. Okay, so I have to integrate. So what is that step? The step will be the 5th. Okay. Integrate the equation, the dp dx, to 2. So how do I do that? A very simple integration rule is, for example, Euler, right? Integration, in which I say simply P2 minus P1 divided by delta L will be dp dx evaluated at 1, right? That will be one simple integration. I'm saying, well, I have calculated here at this point a dp dx, a gradient. And I will say simply the gradient is constant during that interval. Okay, so I can say that dp dx will be equal to P2 minus P1 divided by delta L. And then I find P2 will be equal to dp dx times delta L plus P1. Yes? And then repeat. I repeat, go back to 1. Okay? Number 6 is, I have P2, I have temperature 2, then I go and I find, okay, departing from that point, calculate fluid properties. Okay, I need to calculate Q oil, Q gas local, Q water. Then I calculate dp dx, and then I progress all the way to 3. So it's a very, imagine that you have to run HYSYS if you're using EOS. It's a very time-consuming process, and you have to continue all the way to here to find that famous pressure, to find that unique point in the chart. Okay, remember what we are doing. Okay, we want PWF for a fixed PWH, Q gas or Q oil. Okay, PWH is fixed, and what we are doing now, we are fixing a rate, and we are calculating that point. Maybe it's subdividing our tubing in, I don't know how many, but we have to use maybe 100 steps, maybe we have to use 1,000, one by one, and we are calculating just one point. We don't care anything. The table doesn't have any information of what happens in between. The table just has that point and this point, nothing else. Okay? Then I do, if I want to have one more point, remember we said 10, okay, 10 rates. So we have again to change the rate, another rate, and do the integration. Start from wellhead all the way to bottom hole. Okay? Maybe we'll have, so that's just we have to perform integration. Okay? Properties are changing. How much oil and gas we have in any conduit will change. So we have to do it in a discretized manner. And there are many ways to do that integration. You can use explicit, you can use implicit, you can use Runge-Kutta, you can use whatever. There are many methods. But and that's something the software does inside. So that's why many times it's not very practical to make the intersection using the live model. Okay, because you have this integration process inside. So to make each iteration is like you have a solver inside a solver, and then it becomes very heavy to find the solution. Okay, maybe we'll have a class exercise next week. Okay, on that. Okay, and I think that's all I wanted to say. I think probably there will be a few things that I forget, but okay. And now I think the plan is you work, those of you who want to stay, you work on problem 1, and if you want to look at problem 2. Problem 1, I think I clarified, you have to do it yourself, okay? One thing is to watch me do it here, but another thing is you do it yourself. I have here put some things in red, which are changes with the previous version to make it easy for you. About discretizing the plot, okay, you have to find the length, width, elevation for each segment, okay, the length of the segment along the segment and the change in elevation. So what I suggest, I told you here, use at least 10 points, okay. The 10 points, you place them wherever you want, wherever you feel it captures better the shape of the pipe. So for example, I will put maybe one here, one here, one here, because even though there are fluctuations of the pipe, they are relatively small compared to the big ones. Okay, so I will put maybe one here, 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 maybe here, okay, until you reach 10. And then each segment will have a different length. And what you have to be careful is that the length of each increment within a segment has to be around 1 kilometer. Because otherwise you have problems, the step is simply too large. The variation of properties is too large in the segment. Okay, then you get problems. Yeah. Then the next problem is using single phase oil. And basically you have any one of you here from, that's Malaysia? Yeah? Any one of you here from Malaysia? No? You know the area, the place? How do you pronounce it? Terengganu? Yeah? Okay. So basically the problem we have here, we have a field complex with platforms where the oil, instead of sending it with a tanker, you're sending it to shore, to process on shore. So you have a main export line which has already processed oil. So this oil has a very low gas content. But the thing is that has a tendency to have wax, this oil. Okay. So you want to send it to shore, but you know there will be wax deposition in this pipe. But here there is no problem. You can send a pig, okay, from here all the way to shore with every certain frequency. But that causes a big impact on your production. You have to stop production, you have to send the pig, then you have to wait for it to go through the whole system, and then you can start to flow. So simply the main idea of this exercise is to see how often, to try to estimate how often you have to pig. Okay, so how much that will interrupt your operations, and that gives you what? This uptime. Okay, remember this famous uptime we have in our plateau calculations. Okay. With wax, you maybe have to read a bit the notes, okay? But you have to plot the temperature and pressure profile of the pipe. It's single phase flow liquid, so should be relatively easy to find. You can use the same equations that we use for Peregrino, for this problem on Peregrino. The only new thing here is the temperature. The temperature, I give you an equation, and I think in the compendium it's actually derived where it comes from. I think it is in one of the appendix. So if you're interested to know where it comes from, you just don't accept, which is good, okay, don't accept the equation from just because I tell you, comes by someone. So you have the energy equation, you express the heat, then you start making some simplifications for liquid, and then you end up with that expression, okay? In our case, the pipe is not inclined, but it's actually horizontal, so you can take away everything that has to do with angle. Okay, and that's how you find that equation. So you know the pressure with Bernoulli equation, the temperature with that equation. One small detail is that we are going to use here the local rate, okay? Remember, for the Bernoulli equation we need the local velocity, and for that we need the local rate. So for that we are going to use a black oil approach. Okay, so that will be problem 2. Okay. For every location in the pipe, and here you have to discretize. Okay, remember that pressure and temperature will change. Okay, they will go down, decline with the pipe. But for every location in the pipe, for example, you want to calculate for the next segment, okay, you have to use the local rate, and the local rate is BO times, which is a function of pressure and temperature, times QO at standard conditions. Okay, so you got an equation, I think it's mentioned there on the, where you can use to compute this BO. Okay, and the other complexity, so why do we discretize? One thing is the local rate, which this BO is changing, and then the other thing is that viscosity has is a function of temperature. Okay, and if you see, if you go to the problem, so that's the reason, even though we are in single phase, we have to discretize. And that's, you know, a bit closer to what you do in multiphase, that you have to split in sections. Okay? But if you see the behavior with temperature, when you start reducing temperature, viscosity is going high, and this is in logarithmic scale. Okay, so that is like water. Viscosity then becomes 10 centipoise, already at the temperature of around 30 something. Then you have, at this point you have, that's the cloud point where you start having the first wax crystals start to come out of solution. I think it's around that number. And then after that you see that it's becoming quite high, 100 centipoise. So if by any chance you're getting a cooling on the pipe below that range, you have an increase in the pressure drop. Okay? So that's why you have to discretize, but you cannot assume you have the same viscosity, the same rate. You have to cut the pipe, I think I said segments of 1 kilometer each, and then you have to calculate viscosity, density, velocity for each segment, for each pipe, for each pipe segment. Yeah. And then the last part, so with that you find pressure, temperature. When do you go below the wax appearance temperature? That the wax cloud point is 39. Okay, so actually it's 39. It's someplace here. And then the next question that comes is how do you calculate? So remember, for wax we need, what are the conditions for wax for wax accumulation, for wax deposition?
Pressure, gradient, and flow.
You need to have the wax particles coming out of solution, right? And then from there to accumulate, you have a process of molecular diffusion. Okay, there is more concentration. How is it? Less concentration close to the wall, so you have a gradient of concentration. Okay, so for that I have given you a model, very simple model, how you can compute that. That basically you have the flow of wax in kilogram per second per area. Okay, so this is in I have to multiply it by the area, the outer area of the pipe, or the inner area of the pipe, is equal to the density of the wax that I have provided, viscosity of the oil, these two, which are some factors measured in the lab, and then you have this. If you see here, the concentration gradient is expressed by two parts. Okay, what is driving the wax particles towards the wall is a change in concentration. You have more concentration in the center, and you have less concentration on the wall. So that's driving all the wax particles to go to the wall. But by doing that, this is something I can measure in the lab. I just put a beaker, and then I change the temperature, and I see how much wax comes out of solution. Okay, and then I can measure that curve. And this one, dTdr, I get it from my heat transfer model. Okay, I can know the temperature in the fluid and the temperature on the wall. They are related by this inner heat transfer coefficient. Okay, so that's how I find for each point, for any segment, how do I find how much wax is moving from the oil phase to the wall. Okay, very simple, but just read. I think I tried to give a kind of a detailed explanation, and if you still have questions, you can ask me later. But basically, that gives you the wax flow at any point in the pipe, and then you have to integrate. Okay, you find any method you see is either uniform, you have rectangular approximation, trapezoidal approximation, you decide. Okay, so yeah, before we close, any question? Yes.
From the peaking part, you said we should calculate how often we do, and what is the critical value then when we start peaking?
Yeah. Remember that typically comes given by the maximum pressure that the pipe can take. Okay, because that's if the maximum pressure is what allows you to push. But to make it simple for you, in that case, I have said that the maximum, someplace here, okay, 200 kilogram. So that's the maximum peak, the maximum wax weight that you can push to the surface. Okay, so when you have reached 200 inside the pipe, then you have to do peaking. Okay, but in reality, it's not so simple. Okay, you have to do some more calculation. Okay, so now I think I recommend you work on the exercise. I will be here to help you if you have any questions, and yeah, and we kind of close the teaching part. Yep. Okay.